This is now being recorded.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please note that the training is being recorded. We're going to ask you to save all questions to the very end. And when you do so at the end, we're going to ask you to use the raise hand feature. My name is Robert Thompson, and I will be conducting the briefing this morning. Once again, please hold all your questions until the end of the session. Ethics Commission was founded in 1996. We have a threefold mission: enforcement, opinions, and training, which is what you're doing this morning based on a resolution given to us by the Board of County Commissioners. I want to get right into the briefing itself. So I'm going to ask Mr. Chance to go to the next slide. This is what we will cover this morning: the Florida Sunshine Law, Public Records Act, and Miami-Dade Ethics Code of Conflict of Interest. Next slide. If you ever walk into a room and you hear this quote, "First of all, this meeting never happened," that is your time to turn around and leave. Just be cognizant of the fact that all meetings that are public meetings need to be held in the sunshine. And as we're speaking about sunshine law, please note that the governor has a statement out, an executive order that says until June 30th, we can conduct virtual meetings. So we are within the confines of sunshine law at this point, but after June 30th, these rules will apply unless the governor extends his executive order. Next slide. Sunshine law was created for advisory boards and that make recommendations to government officials. Any gathering of two or more members of the same board where board business is discussed, discussion of any issue that will foreseeably come before the board for action. And believe it or not, it's impact all elected and appointed boards in their subcommittees. It also impacts staff members who are appointed to a public board. Please keep in mind, while this is great and it impacts all the boards, there's one organization that does not have be in records in terms of the sunshine law, and that's the state legislature who created it, and they don't have to abide by it, but they do have some other rules. Next slide, please. Three basic requirements of sunshine law: meetings must be open to the public. Public must receive reasonable notice of meetings, and minutes. Minutes are the most important aspect of your meeting, because for every board in Miami-Dade County, there's one or two people that don't like your board. They don't like the decisions. They will always request your minutes and go through them with a fine-tooth comb and make sure you did things like proper protocol, that you had a quorum, that you did all the right things, and they will pick and choose which pieces that they think are not in compliance. And the rule of thumb is you can save yourself a lot of trouble just by abiding by the basic requirements. Next slide. Reasonable notice depends on what the issue is. If you have reasonable notice for your board, I'm sure the staff at TPO get the information out well in advance. It's important, obviously, if you're going to go to a meeting, to notice the time and place of meeting. All these things are taken care of by staff. Excuse me. We say prominently display the notice in the agency's office and a place set aside for that purpose, and at least 24 hours in advance to put notice out there. Again, your staff is very good at what they do. They will send press releases. They will make phone calls. And during COVID-19, as evidence, we're doing a Zoom meeting today via advisory board training. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Public has a right to be present and heard at all meetings, but they don't have a right to be rude, disrespectful, use profanity, and so on and so forth. I always say that the chair controls the meeting and pretty much makes sure that the meeting runs in a smooth and orderly manner. Public boards can adopt reasonable rules. For instance, you can limit the amount of time an individual
Mr. Thompson, your microphone has stopped working. Mr. Thompson? Mr. Thompson? Paul? Nope, 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 nope. Paul?
Yeah.
Can you hear it?
I can hear you.
Mr. Thompson?
He's not looking at the screen.
Okay. Do you have his phone number, Paul, that you can call him?
Let me call him.
Please call him. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, we can't hear you. Mr. Thompson, we can't hear you. Mr. Thompson, we can't hear you.
Yeah, he knows now. Okay. He's trying to.
Did anyone hear me?
Now
There
we
you
can
go.
hear you, yes.
Yes, Mr. Thompson.
I apologize. I apologize.
Okay, your camera just went back out.
Camera just went back out.
Yeah.
Camera should be
Yeah, there
right
you go.
back.
Yeah, you good
Okay.
now. You good now.
Mr.
All right,
Thompson,
so-
you were at the beginning of this slide.
Okay.
If you could go back and start over with this slide. And if you see Paul Chance come on the screen, that means we cannot hear you.
I apologize for
No
whatever.
problem.
Public right to participate in meetings. Yes, but they don't have a right to be rude and disrespectful. The chair controls the meeting, so it's very important that people are civil when they're dealing with the boards. You can limit the amount of time to speak to 3 minutes. You can confine them to the agenda items and speak on them. And if it's something that they really want to speak on, you can have them register in advance of the meeting via cards and give that to staff so that you can have a look at what's going on, okay? But they have no right to be rude or disrespectful to board members. Next slide.
Hold on, sorry.
It's okay. I just want to make sure you can hear me. Voting in the Sunshine Law. There are times you're going to see people say, oh, I don't like something, so I'm not going to vote. Well, you can't use secret ballots, and you can't say I'm not going to vote because I don't like it. You either have a conflict of interest or you don't. And if you have a conflict, you should announce it publicly. You should leave the room during the discussion and the vote. And there's a state form 8B that you file with the clerk within 15 days of the vote. This does not mean you don't see people get up and walk away from the dais or whatever the case may be. But the bottom line is if you have a conflict, contact the Commission on Ethics and Public Trust, and we'll work on that issue, because everything that's perceived as a voting conflict by citizens is not necessarily a voting conflict. Okay, next slide, please. Minutes in the Sunshine Law, we talked about it briefly. Some boards that are quasi-judicial have to have minutes verbatim. Others just have to have brief bullet points about the process. And some boards do sound recordings. Not all boards are required to do so. It's important that, again, that your minutes be quote unquote accurate as possible. Next slide, please. Criminal misdemeanor in the second degree, removal from office. This normally applies to elected officials because the governor will remove them from office. There are fines up to $500, and official actions taken by the board can be voided, which means if you work on something for 2 or 3 years and some technicality, because of that, it all gets voided. It kind of tends to not make you happy. So bottom line, you want to cross your I's, dot your T's, and just make sure that you're in compliance with Sunshine Law. Next slide. $1.4 million should shake anybody's in their boots. Next slide, please. City of Venice, Florida decided to have all their meetings via email, their personal iPhones, their personal laptops, about some significant issues within the City of Venice, which cost them $750,000 in the Sunshine lawsuit. They decided they weren't going to talk to the public until the last minute, and one of the citizens asked them in a public meeting, where did these suggestions come from? Next slide, please. The mayor then said, well, yeah, we had meetings. We did them on our phones. We did all the above, private email accounts to discuss public business. And instead of them giving them the public records request that they asked for, and the $750,000 had another $290,000 added to it, which of course brought us to the $1.4 million. If you have private email accounts that have public business, send them to staff. Let staff put those emails away so that you don't have to keep them on your phone. And the bottom line is, it's very, very important that you have those public meetings in the sunshine. A lot of times you have good friends that sit on the board. Human nature says, oh, let's go out and have coffee. And then you have that discussion. You never know who's listening and who doesn't like your board. And people always think just because you have a friend on the board with you, you can't have a conversation. You can speak to one another. You just can't discuss agenda items. Don't send it in an email. Don't send them in, CC or blind copies, because technology will allow those sites to be opened up, and you really don't want to have the Sunshine Law violations. It's just not worth it. Next slide, please. Let's never forget the public's desire for transparency has to be, and so basically you can see the slide for yourself. But basically what we're saying here is public records are public records. And again, the desire for transparency has to be balanced by a need for concealment. In other words, there are some people who think if you do something or you say something in the email or you put something in the public record, if it doesn't sound good or it's embarrassing, you can remove it. Folks, a public record is a public record is a public record is a public record. And even though you delete it, somehow or another, it will stay in the system. When you send emails to staff at the county, guess what? It is a public record if it is about public business. I always recommend that if you don't want your private email account out there, create one specifically for your board business. That way, everything you deal with goes into that one email account, and that's, if necessary, send it to staff and let them tuck it away, especially if it's board business, because there are citizens out there who will ask for that information. Next slide, please. Public Records Act, right to access any public record. Official business of any state or local government agency. Next slide. Print materials, emails, text messages, other social media. Technology and wireless and your phones, your cell phones, smartphones, tablets. Some people put their whole life history on those kinds of information, digital devices. Folks, if you have a smartphone and you want to create a folder for just board business, that's fine. I still say when it's board business, send it to staff, let them tuck it away, because someone at some point is going to ask for those. Okay. Next slide. Right of access. And Mr. Chance, can you just back up 1 minute? I want to talk about something I kind of glossed over. Go back to the previous slide, please. Yeah, the one that shows social media. Okay. Yeah, social media, folks. Just because you send an email or something on Facebook to someone doesn't make it a violation. 9 times out of 10, what happens is someone posts something on Facebook, it goes around through 300 plus folk, and then it ends up coming back to one of your board members. And right away, someone's going to say, oh, Sunshine Law violation, we got them. That's not necessarily the case, but we always ask that you be careful and discussing board business and agendas on Facebook, Instagram, and all of the above, because someone will make something out of it more than it needs to be. And everything is looked at on a case-by-case basis, okay? Next slide, please. Thank you, Mr. Chance. Reasonable time. A lot of times people want public records. Guess what they do? They call 11 o'clock at night and want public records, and by 7 o'clock the next morning, they're complaining they didn't get the public records. For your purposes, board members, you refer any request for public records to staff. Do not ignore them. Keep in mind the example of the city of Venice, $290,000. Staff will take care of it. If you get emails, send them to staff. If you get something in the regular mail, send it to staff and allow them to handle the matter. Do not ignore it. There was one city manager that went to jail for ignoring public records requests. He got 100 of them, and he said he never responded because he didn't have the information and he didn't think he had to respond. Okay? Remember, do not attempt to deal with it on your own. Send it to the staff at the TPO, and the appropriate individuals will get your issue resolved. Next slide, please. You can always have people who want to inspect the records, and they can come and look at them. They don't have to put their request in writing. They don't have to tell you what it's for. But you cannot say to them, okay, folk, it's going to take a month for us to give you a copy of the sign-in sheet or a copy of who attended the meeting today. If it's something simple, give it to them. Yes, you have costs associated with that, and what was happening in the past. People would request outrageous amounts of information. Staff would take a lot of time, put the information together, and the person would say, I'm not paying that, but by that time, the work has been done. So what happens now, staff can request payment up front, and we keep it moving, okay? Next slide, please. There are people who are going to say, oh, there's an exemption, and staff is familiar with this. If there's an exemption, then the custodian must state what that exemption is. And as personal requests, when you go out, board members, if someone tells you there's an exemption, they have to tell you what that exemption is, okay? And if some information is exempt, it can be redacted. When disposing of or destroying records, please note that there's a state records retention schedule that all government entities have to respond to and abide by. Next slide, please. Again, spoke about it briefly. Fees for copying, additional charges established by the state statute, and special service charges are permitted for extensive clerical. I say a person wants all of the emails from all of the meetings and meeting requests, and they want to have it placed on a CD. Staff can put it on there through IT, and the costs associated with that will be passed on to the individual. So it's important. It can be done, but they have the right, staff does, to collect those monies in advance. Next slide, please. People love the sue. So if the person doesn't get the request, they tend to go straight to the courts, and they will get an immediate hearing within a 6-month window if there's a public records request that they feel they were improperly denied. What has changed is that they used to go straight to the courts, and they now have to give staff or the agency that they feel that has not provided them with the information a week's notice and something in writing letting them know that they're going to quote unquote file a civil suit against them. The other part in all of this is if it is determined that the request is designed to cause a violation or to harass the government entity, that individual may not get attorney's fees in that process. Okay, so a lot of attorneys are paying attention to it. I don't think they want to work for free for anyone. Next slide, please. Miami-Dade Conflict of Interest and Code of Ethics Ordinance. This is section 2-11.1 of the county code. Next slide, please. Financial disclosure, please disregard as your board does not have this requirement. The only other thing I can say to you is if you sit on another county board, this does apply. Check with your board staff. Next slide, please. Transacting business. There are people who say when you sit on a county board, you should make a living outside of working for that county board. You don't get paid anything, and I tell folk only two things you get for free when you work with a county board, and in the form of gifts, which will come up shortly. I will explain them to you, but please keep in mind, the Ethics Commission does issue opinions on what you should and should not do in that process. What you don't want to do is wait till after the fact. You can pick up the phone, you can contact our office, you can send a request. One of the things you have to keep in mind, the request you send has to be about yourself and not other members of the board. If the chair or staff asks the question on behalf of the chair, that's a different scenario, but please keep in mind, get that opinion up front or talk to someone. I've seen people lose $2 million contracts on a technicality. Note that the county's definition of immediate family is defined as spouse, domestic partner, parents, step-parents, children, and stepchildren. You don't see brother and sister, and you don't see uncle and aunt. Different scenario. And each organization, based on who they answer to, has a different definition of immediate family. So please note and do your homework ahead of time. Next slide, please. Gifts. The only two gifts you get for free working for county boards are, and I always tell people the same thing, frustration and aggravation. There are people out there think you're getting free stuff, and that's not the case. So in the past, we brought you to downtown, got you to cheap parking. But bottom line, folk, is don't accept gifts and for doing your job or doing what you do in terms of the board, whether you vote one way or not, is very important. Gifts don't include political contributions, gifts from relatives or household members, awards for professional or civic achievement, and materials which are solely informational of an advertising nature. It's very important, folks. All of a sudden, you don't hear from someone for years, and all of a sudden they find out, oh, you're on the TPO, I got an issue. They need to bring it to the board meeting so that everyone hears exactly what you're saying. And please remember, when in doubt, don't. Next slide, please. You can't solicit or demand unless it's for a sanctioned government or charitable purpose. You have United Way, you have Red Cross, and so many different scenarios. And the last bullet there, you can't accept the gift based upon performance of an official public act or legal duty, i.e. voting or non-voting. You have to be careful, and when in doubt, ask the question, and that's what the Ethics Commission does rather well. Next slide, please. Gift disclosure, since you won't be accepting any gifts, we don't have to worry about this, but if you're giving something to go and represent the organization, or you go to a dinner or something and you're there speaking in official capacity, say you receive a gift in January, you have till the end of June to report it. And what happens, and I've seen it, one day after the report is supposed to be made, some citizen will file a complaint. So best scenario is don't accept the gift and doing what you do for the TPO. Next slide, please. Exploitation of official position does not happen in Miami-Dade County. No one does it. It's similar to saying that there's no such thing as road rage. Please keep in mind, there are folk that will try you. They will ask you for certain things. Bottom line, refer them to staff or ask them to put it in writing. And when in doubt, again, don't. Exploitation of official position. Normally, the boards, we don't have a lot of problems with that. We have problems in other areas. But the bottom line is there are people who think you get this, you get so many free things and so much inside information that they want you to assist them. and you have to be very, very careful in doing so. Next slide, please. Confidential information. I do not believe that you deal with a lot of confidential information in your organization. But the bottom line is that if the information that someone asks you about is not already in the public record and you have any doubt about it, go back through staff, and don't allow folk to get information from you because they think you're giving them something inside. Again, if it's not a public record or something that they can access through public record, I'll be very cautious in providing them with any confidential information. I don't think your board does a lot of that. And the other thing that's important, you're going to find citizens who come to you after a meeting and say, I heard this, the minutes, I heard this, it was a great meeting. Can you tell me the gist of what happened? I always refer them back to staff for the draft of the minutes or the minutes so that there's no confusion about what was said. What you will find, people have selective listening. They hear certain things, and once you tell them, this is what I recall, they run with that. So be very, very careful. And the other part is you can't use any information you gain knowledge of by sitting on a board in terms of a personal gain or benefit, which you have a pretty strong board. So let's move to the next slide. Appearances. This is one of those sticking points. It's great that you have a friend that's coming before your board. You want to be helpful, but you cannot appear before your own board on behalf of a third party seeking a benefit. What we ask you to do is recuse yourself or, state your conflict if you feel that there's one. And you cannot receive compensation from a third party seeking a benefit from your board. We had one gentleman who had a client that came before his board. He wanted to come off the dais, come down and represent his client, and then go back and vote on the issue. And we advised him, the chair advised him, number one, you have to recuse yourself. Number two, you have to leave the room. And if you don't want to do those things, then you have to resign from the board, and then you'll be able to represent your client. Doesn't mean we're stopping you from making a living, but you cannot represent your client before you're on board. And you also have to be careful. We've had some instances where we're sat on boards, they approve grants for their particular entity, and found out that when they looked at the nonprofit, it was just that one individual sitting on the board. So be very careful in terms of appearances. Next slide, please. Yes, you can have financial interest, but you got to be very careful in terms of dealing with immediate family. Advisory board members, again, are pretty decent about this. They don't have a lot of issues with this. We've had some cities where the sitting mayor, councilman, commissioner, and manager involved themselves in some real estate deals and bought properties until it was brought to our attention and they had to dissolve the real estate deal and so on and so forth. When you're dealing with financial interests, please ask for an opinion up front. It can save you a lot of headache. And again, once you have that opinion and it's legally binding, you have something that, says, this is what I requested, I can do this, or I can't, and this is why. And if you get an opinion from us and you're not happy with it, you can appeal it back to the Ethics Commission. And if that answer doesn't work for you, you can also appeal it to the 3rd District Court of Appeals, okay? But be very careful. Next slide, please. Interestingly enough, you may know a lot of these people listed on this slide: lawyers, architects, public relations firms, and other members or any transaction and trying to refer folk to them. Real life, real world example, a city attorney decided to recommend to an employee, a friend of hers, to work on the employee's behalf to sue the city that individual, that attorney represented. You have to be careful in terms of these kind of recommendations. And if this is the case that they're recommending professional services, it should be done in the board meeting, and it should be done through the board and so on and so forth, not individually to someone outside saying this is what I want, because the decision, if I'm not mistaken, may end up going to other boards or someone else. And the bottom line is you want to make sure you're not making these kind of decisions unless it is appropriately done. So next slide, please. Voting conflicts. Very bottom there, officer, partner, consultant, fiduciary, stockholder, debtor, director, of counsel, so on and so forth. You can't vote on these things if you're going to be directly affected. How do you know if you're going to be directly affected? I'll give you an example. And we have opinions, and I would say you end up speaking to our organization. If you live in an environment where there was 1 in 10,000 homes, and something you're going to vote on is going to impact those 10,000 homes the same way it's going to impact you, 9 out of 10, we look at the percentage and how that works, and we will still ask you to do an opinion. But if you live in an environment where 1 out of the 5 homes affected and 1 of those are yours, it doesn't mean that you got a voting conflict. It just means we look at it and we look at the facts. Nothing is rubber stamped, and everything we look at is fact specific. So when in doubt, ask the question. And I always quote Admiral Grace Harper, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Well, in this day and age, it's not that simple. So please ask the question. We get a lot of the questions about voting conflicts, and our services are free. Okay, next slide. Penalties, admonition, $500 fine, $1,000 for each subsequent count. Excuse me. The state attorney does have concurrent jurisdiction with us in our ordinance. If it becomes criminal, no, there's no ethics jail. We don't arrest people. We don't go after people for perception or perception of impropriety. There are folks who say, well, it looks like it, so maybe they did it. That's not the way the system works. And for those of you who are worried about people who file frivolous complaints, there is a provision in our ordinance that allows us to go after folk who file frivolous complaints. Again, if it's criminal in nature, we send that criminal complaint to the state attorney's office, and they deal with it accordingly. Next slide, please. These are our ethics commissioners who are all non-salaried in terms of our organization. They're not appointed by the BCC. 2 are appointed by the Chief Judge of the 11th Judicial Circuit Courts. 1's appointed by Miami-Dade County League of Cities. Another's appointed with a shared appointment between Law School and St. Thomas. And the last one is appointed by FIU's Labor and Research Center. On behalf of Jose Arroyo, our ethics commissioners, we want to thank you for your attention. Next slide, please. All done, folks. Now, remember, if you have questions, please use the raise hand scenario on your Zoom scenario, and I'm open for questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
Hank
you hear me?
Sanchez is Hank Sanchez Resnick. Mr. Thompson is on and has a question for you. Please go ahead,
Yes, sir,
Hank.
I'm listening.
Hi. Thanks for the background of your picture. That's not what my question is about, but it's very pretty. It reminds me of home.
Thank you.
Okay, I am an advocate for a bicycle and pedestrian trail. And I am a member.
Can you start over again? Because I couldn't hear your question from the beginning.
Okay, I am an advocate for a bicycle and pedestrian trail in Coconut Grove, and
Okay.
I'm on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So is it a conflict of interest for me to make presentations to the BPAC about the trail and ask for the BPAC to support the trail? I'm not, by the way, I'm not employed by the trail. I'm a volunteer. There's a possibility at some point that they might pay me for something.
Then you're gonna have a problem. And here's what I would recommend to you. Do a request for opinion through our office. You could do it one of two ways. You could send it to ethics@miamidade.gov. It goes directly to our executive director, and what we will do is take it based on the information you provide and respond to your question. I'm not an attorney, but I will tell you, if you start to get paid and you're representing a third party, and that's one of the things we talked about, you have to be very, very careful, because here's what happens. People will view the BPAC part of you working with the county, and then they will look at, are you using the BPAC part of you to be paid or get some benefit? So I would strongly suggest you do a request for opinion and send it to that email again, ethics@miamidade.gov, so that you can have all the right tools to go get it done.
I really appreciate your feedback. It makes me think of another member of the BPAC who I'm almost certain is employed to be an advocate for, and I don't want to identify him, but I think he's employed. He's the director of an organization that presides over another trail, and he is often, and he's paid, I'm sure of it. And he has often come to our group and asked for support, given reports. I don't think anybody's ever said you're in conflict. I can't hear you. You're talking, but I don't hear you.
Can anyone hear me?
I hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I hate to keep asking you to repeat. You said something about he's a director or something. I still say folk like that, if they're in the employment of the municipality, there's probably some mechanism for you to talk to someone at that municipality and work through that process. I would start there if that's the case, and then, work from there. And if, you don't feel like they moved or something on your process, that's what we're for. We do have a hotline as well. So you don't have to mention names, but I'm sure someone would take a look at it.
Okay. I'm particularly interested in my own case, and right now I'm not being paid, so I don't think there's any issue. And it's really up to this other person, I think, to deal with his own situation. It's not up to me.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next. Hello, anyone else there?
I do not see any other raised hands. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand. I know that there are, hold on, Mr. Thompson, let's just give the audience a minute.
Here's what I would also suggest.
Mm-hmm.
I will give my email address to them, but I would prefer if they have any questions so that the rest of the board members can benefit from it. If they don't have them now, that they put them together, maybe send them through you, and I will do my best to get responses or some answers to whatever questions they may have, or they can call directly.
Okay.
I see someone raise their hand.
Yes, let me get them in for you.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, you might want to, I don't know if everybody knows what a raised hand is on there.
It's right by their name.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Stanley.
Hi, Stanley Rigo with Miami-Dade Beacon Council. Mr. Thompson, thank you for your presentation, always very informative. Do you think, just as a way to be sort of proactive, because we have these ethics training, you know, every so often, maybe once a year or once every 6 months or whatever the period is, but do you think it's a good exercise of each of these different committees to have maybe some, you know, maybe we reserve 5 minutes at the end of a committee meeting or 5 minutes prior to a committee meeting, just to kind of go over rules or any concerns that people may have as it relates to ethics?
I heard part of your question, and I'm so apologetic. So you said, do I think it's what in reference to ethics training?
Yeah, I was suggesting that because the trainings are done pretty seldomly, and I was suggesting, does it make sense for committees to reserve a few minutes either before or after? You're not hearing me, are you? Can someone relay the message, or should I try it over again?
Hold on 1 second. Let's see. Paul.
Yeah, Mr. Thompson, we can't hear you. Just give us a second. You know, we can't hear you. Yeah, we still can't hear you yet. Yeah. Not sure what's going on. Yeah, no. We still
I'm
can't.
going to mute him, and then I'm going to ask him to unmute.
Yeah. Mr. Thompson, try to unmute. Mute yourself.
Can anyone hear me now?
There we go.
Okay.
Why is this doing this, folks?
Can you hear me?
I wish I could tell you, but I don't have an answer. Mr. Stanley, would you give me your question again, please?
Sure. First of all, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, Stanley.
But it looks like Mr.
Did I
Thompson.
lose Mr. Stanley?
No, Mr. Thompson, he's going to ask the question right now, okay? He's going to re-ask the question right now.
Can't hear anybody.
Oh boy.
Is there a
I'll
way
try
that
this one more time.
Yeah, I can hear him, but it looks like he can't hear us. Is there a way that I can just
Can anyone hear me at all?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Thompson.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Stanley, are you still there?
I am. Can you hear me? I'm here. Can you hear me?
Folks, here's what I'm going to recommend. I don't know why the mic is giving me such a hard time. If you have questions in particular that you would like me to respond to, I would say send them to Ms. Rockwell. But initially, I would ask her, I'll give you my email address if you feel like you want to send them directly to me. If you can hear me, my email address is robthom@miamidade.gov. Once again, my email address is robthom@miamidade.gov. My direct phone number, and I would suggest you dial this one, 305-579-2594, and I will return your call. I apologize for technical difficulties, but I like to make sure that your questions get answered or get sent to the right people for the right reasons, okay? Once again, I wish I could control this. Hopefully you hear me.
We can hear you, Mr. Thompson.
Yes,
I'll try
Mr. Thompson.
one more time and let's see what happens. Hello?
Yes, Mr. Thompson,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Should I try it one more
I
time?
got no sound, folks.
Okay,
You got no sound. Okay.
that's all right.
I'm unmuted all the way around. Apologize. So
What I can,
I can't hear anything or anyone. I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, it looks like he's still not able to hear me. All right, can one of you repeat the phone number that he?
Can you
he
hear me,
just-
Mr. Chance?
Yes,
Interesting.
everybody can hear you. Pick up the phone.
I don't hear anything on my speakers. I got my sound up.
Paul, I'm going to send
Let's try
him.
one more thing.
Let me see if I can send him the.
Just send him the phone number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing too.
So
But
you can.
he's not picking up the phone though.
Mm-hmm. Let me just send this really quick to
Okay,
him.
I just told him to pick up the phone.
Okay, I just sent him the call-in information. Maybe that will. Let's give him just a couple of minutes.
All right, Elizabeth, he's going to call in right now.
Okay, very good. Let's give him a minute. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Okay, can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let's try it this way. I apologize. Go ahead for any other questions.
Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry about that.
That's
Go ahead.
okay. That's we're all still trying to get used to this virtual exercise. It was. I was just thinking through. I recognize that these ethics training sessions are very important in terms of understanding our responsibility and such, but they happen only, maybe once or twice a year in terms of required training. And I was wondering if either before or after a committee meeting, does it make sense for the board members to huddle up for a few minutes to just review or, have an exercise where we're asking ourselves, was there anything in conflict there? So we don't do that currently, at least not the last meetings that I've attended. And I wonder if that's a good practice for us to just, question the meeting that took place in terms of, were there anything that we might deem, reviewable, that kind of stuff.
Well, let me say this to you. I respect what you're saying, but you have very, very solid staff there, Ms. Rockwell. She is the kind of person, I'm not saying this because I want her to hear this, she will bring it to your attention. But what I would say, if you're going to have the conversation amongst yourselves, are you going to be voting? And I would just say to you, defer to her or pick up the phone and call our office. I think 9 out of 10, your meetings are run pretty decent. I don't think you have, I don't see your name, your office name coming through, or your boards coming through our office for anything other than like an opinion here or there. I would guard it. I wouldn't tell you not to have the discussion, but I would say the people who are going to make the final decision on whether it's a conflict or not reside in our office.
I see.
So you may just want to do it. It's a free service, and again, you want to get away from perception, because what may be a conflict of interest to you or to another board member may not be a conflict at all.
Sure.
And so, you utilize the office, utilize the resources that are available to you.
Great. And could you repeat your phone number again?
My phone number is 305-579-2594. That is the main line, but let me give you my direct number because we're working out of the office. 305-350-0630. And please take down my email as well. robthom@miamidade.gov.
Okay, got it. And I agree with you. Elizabeth's always been extremely resourceful, so I'll know to reach out to her as well. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, let me disable talking. Okay, Mr. Thompson, we have Dr. Claudius is next. I'm sorry, Dr. Carnegie is next, my apologies. And then Brett Bibeau will be coming in. So I'm going to bring in Dr. Carnegie at this moment.
Thank you.
So I'm going
Thank
to
you.
ask him to unmute. Okay.
Okay.
Hi,
Good
Dr.
morning.
Carnegie.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
All right, Mr. Thompson, even though we had some IT technical issues, I want to congratulate you for an excellent and informative presentation. And that's one point. And the second point is I have a question. Given that we're
Yes,
living
sir.
in a very dynamic and litigious society and environment, what I want to know is, as a best practice, what would be the recommended frequency for members of these boards? I'm on CTAC, members of our boards, for taking refresher ethics training. Would you recommend every 3 years, every 5 years, or even more frequently, seeing that we do have members coming and going?
And to answer your question, you must have heard this somewhere before, because I strongly recommend between the 3 to 5 year window. Now, if you have new board members, it's even more important that they take it right away. But I always say to staff, and I will say to any chair, anyone who's in charge, that it depends on the direction and guidance from the chair. We say 3 years, sometimes things change, but there's no requirement in the ordinance to take it more than once. I give you guys your board credit because you don't wait until something terrible has happened to say, oh, by the way, we should do some ethics refresher training. I would say 3 years would suffice. Sometimes you don't have new board members. And if you want to wait the 5-year window, because that kind of is when a lot of changes may take place. Specifically, for instance, the public record scenario where they used to be able to just go to court and sue folk. Now they have to give you some advance notice. So there's some little things that, you need to stay aware of. And sometimes it doesn't hurt to brush up on sunshine law because when you least expect it, some citizen is called and says, those people violated sunshine law. So it won't hurt. But the bottom line is what we say to the organization is based on what the chair requests from our organization.
Well, good answer. And the reason why I'm asking the question is because I am a chair of one of these boards. And with the cooperation of a coordinator, in my case, Mr. Chance, we normally have an agenda item for chair's report. And in that chair's report, one of our regular item is to remind all of our members about ethics training, but we lack some definition as to frequency, and that's why I asked the question, because in the future, if you could give me some guidelines on the frequency, I will make sure we have such language in my chair's report. And if your recommendation is every 2 years or every 3 years or between 3 and 5 years, then I would standardize that language in my chair's report. Like I said, every meeting, we have a chair's report, and there is a statement, a regular statement just like this. I just want to fine tune the language based on the best practices and your recommendation. Again, given the fact that we're living in a very dynamic, litigious society, and things are changing rapidly.
Yes, sir. I will speak with the executive director. And on another note, for a lot of folks that don't know, the clerk of the courts, the clerk of the boards, they will probably ask when people have taken their training. I get a lot of those calls. So it's important that folks take the training. But the bottom line is I will get with the executive director, and we will get your response, Dr. Carnegie.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carnegie. Let me disable talking. Okay, I'm now going to bring in Brett Bibeau, Mr. Thompson. He is on the phone, so he's unable to raise his hand. So let me see.
Hey,
if we
Brett,
can...
how you doing?
We got
I'm
Brett.
great, Mr. Thompson. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Been a long time.
Yes, sir. Glad to hear your presentation, which I'm so familiar with, and thank you for all you do for our community.
You're quite welcome.
I think my colleague, Mr. Slesnik, may have been referring, Hank Resnick, I'm sorry, may have been referring to me. I am the managing director of the Miami River Commission and serve proudly as a volunteer appointed board member on the TPO BPAC for about 17 years. And I've been with the River Commission for 20 years. River Commission is a nonprofit entity. I'm the only staffer. And we do advocate for the public Miami River Greenway. But the Miami River Commission is not, does not directly, like for example, when the government gives big grants to construct it, the Riverwalk is constructed by either the city or the county or the private sector with a public section of the Riverwalk. So it's my understanding that, and the previous, opinions that were provided over the years, is that to have a conflict of interest, you would have to have a direct financial benefit, a direct financial gain. So my salary is a annual salary, regardless if it doesn't fluctuate, based on whether or not the city gets funding for the Riverwalk or et cetera. So because there's no, direct financial benefit, the opinion has always been that there is no conflict of interest. Similarly, that's why, other board members such as Colin Worth, who represents the city and works for the city, and therefore to some extent advocates and supports for city projects, or the representatives over the years from and their program, or even when you look at the Miami River Commission and its 18 volunteer board members established. The volunteer board members, if they have a direct personal gain, then they would have to, for that particular item, declare a conflict of interest. But it's in their nature to advocate for the river in general, and there's no conflict of interest in that regard. So if I've missed anything, or if there's something I'm missing, and there is something to consider, then I'm happy to reconsider it. But that's always been my understanding.
Okay, let me help you. Let me help you. Number one, I am not a staff attorney. I am fully familiar with what you're discussing and what you're talking about. What I would do more than anything else, if you have any additional questions or comments or thoughts about it, based on what you're telling me, the opinions have stated exactly what you talked about, I would strongly ask you to reach out to our executive director, who is Mr. Jose Arroyo. Let me give you his direct number. If you feel any, uncomfortableness with your situation, just call him up. His number is 305-350-0613. And talk with him. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong, but along with staff that's gonna, deal with your issue. I know you, and I'll leave it at that, but I would recommend that you speak with the executive director on if you have any questions of that nature. Okay? Hello?
Understood. I had you on mute by accident. Sorry. Understood. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, Mr. Thompson, we are going to now bring in Mr. Hank Sanchez-Resnick. So give me one second.
Okay.
And he is back, and I'm asking him to unmute.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I have to sign off, but I would like to get a copy of your slides. Can I get that?
Sure.
Okay, that would be really helpful. I know that Mr. Walford has my email. Kevin, can you get that to me?
Yes, he will, because he calls me every day bugging me about something. So I'll be more than happy to make sure Mr. Walford gets what you need, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for a good webinar. Thank you. I've got to go.
You're welcome, sir. Yes,
Bye.
Sir. Yes, Mr. Walford, you do a great job. Any other questions?
I do not see any other hands raised, Mr. Thompson. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? If so, please raise your hand. It's right by your name. You just hit the raise hand feature, so you can ask a question. All right. Okay, Mr. Thompson, I do not see any other raised hands or anybody who wants to speak. So if you want to go ahead and wrap up and close out the conference for us, the webinar for us. Thank you.
Thanks for this opportunity. I will continue to practice my muting and unmuting speaker skills and microphone. But if there's any information that people need, Ms. Rockwell, Mr. Chance, Mr. Walford, and staff over there, Serrano, the whole group, I always recommend that they go through staff first. That way, we can, make it work for the rest of your board members. And I appreciate the opportunity to provide this briefing to the board members. And I thank you.
Okay, this concludes the webinar, and thank you all for attending. And we will go ahead and stop recording. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you and goodbye.